What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be diving into some cards that I can't wait to rotate from MTG Arena for Standard. These are cards that maybe to me they've been kind of annoying, kind of hard to kind of get around, and kind of when your opponents plays these cards, they definitely do get kind of annoying. And you know, it's one of those things that everyone's list is going to vary what cards they can't wait to leave the format and what cards they do kind of want to stay. So this is just my opinion, and I guess if you guys have, you know, other cards that I may have not mentioned in this video, you can always leave them down in the comments below. I always would like to hear maybe cards that maybe you guys found annoying that you can't wait to leave Standard. But with that out of the way, let's just dive into the list and let's just start getting into it. So the first thing I want to do is start off with a couple of honorable mentions, as these are cards that I do think, you know, we're going to miss when they leave Standard, but at the same time too, I kind of can't wait for them to be leaving Standard. And the first card up is going to be Deadly Dispute. Now, this is kind of one of those cards that I've kind of been enjoying more so in like the Rakdos Anvil style decks. But it's definitely been a card that has a lot of value for only being a 2-mana instant speed card that at the cost of sacrificing a creature, you get to draw 2 cards, create a treasure token. And it was one of those cards that pairs very well against, you know, small creatures that get extra value like a Shambling Ghast or an Eye Twitch or something like that. So I guess playing mono black decks or decks that would play cards that they would, you know, sacrifice a Deadly Dispute is definitely one of those things that, you know, the card had a lot of value for only being a common. And it's definitely one of those things that does get kind of annoying that you are able to get a bunch of extra value out of a creature that, you know, you kind of want to throw away into, you know, the graveyard to get an additional trigger, and then on top of that being able to draw a bunch of cards. It's definitely one of those cards that I typically found to be a little bit frustrating to play against for the most part, because you kind of understood that if your opponent played like a Shambling Ghast or an Eye Twitch and they left 2 mana open and it's their turn, more than likely they are going to play that Deadly Dispute, and, you know, you're going to have to, they're going to get a bunch of value and get ahead on cards. So it's definitely one of those cards that, you know, while I do enjoy playing it, it is a card that I kind of can't wait to leave Standard just because it is a lot of value for such a low cost. Now, the next card up on the list is actually kind of similar value in the sense, and that card is going to be Expressive Iteration. It is a red-blue card that is sorcery speed, so it's only a thing that you can do on your turn. But it's definitely one of those cards that every time you play it's like the card that they play to kind of get that card advantage. They get to put 1 card in hand, 1 card back into their library, and then 1 card into their exile that they then can follow up and play. Typically in this situation, you know, the player's probably looking for a land card that they're going to play with the exile card, and then they're going to put a good card into their hand. So essentially it is like a draw 2, but you get to kind of choose what those 2 cards are, and then the one goes back to the bottom of your library or back into your library in general. And yet again, another card that has high power. It is definitely kind of interesting that it stayed legal in Standard where it's been banned in various other formats, which is definitely kind of interesting and kind of says a lot about how powerful the card is overall. It is definitely going to be another card that I do think, you know, I'm going to be happy to see leave play just because, you know, there's a lot of value in the 2-mana drop slot, and, you know, for being an uncommon, it does have a lot of value that I feel like, you know, there's other cards that probably didn't see as much play because of like this card, just like Deadly Dispute. You know, these are definitely cards that have kind of high value for such a low rarity overall. Now, moving on to the list, this is kind of where we get into things. Some of the cards may be a little bit more annoying. Some of the cards may not be a little bit annoying. But the first card up on the list is actually a card that kind of gave me a little bit of like, you know, a little bit of, I guess from seeing it a lot, going all the way back to when it first got announced and released into Arena. That card's going to be Rune Crab. It's a 1-mana crab that's a 0/3 that every time you play a land, you mill 3 cards. And this is kind of that card that worked very well with Dimir Rogues back in the day when it was released. And it just helped their overall mill strategy that helped get cards in their graveyard. And then on top of that, as we get into the more modern Standard that is currently Standard right now, it's evolved into being in the into the Is It Mill deck as well. So, you know, it's definitely one of those cards that, you know, we are going to be losing a lot of the key cards from mill, and just seeing Rune Crab a lot kind of it kind of invites like a no fun kind of game, just because if they get multiples of these out, you're milling like 6 cards of your library every time they play a land. And just seeing it for the past like 2 years is definitely going to be a sigh of relief that, you know, your opponent's not going to have a 1-mana play, at least as of right now, that they're going to be able to play and also mill you at the same time too, which creates a weird, not as fun mechanic, I think, overall. And it's definitely one of those things that I do think some players do like mills, but sometimes seeing mill enough and seeing a card enough in those mill decks is definitely kind of a sigh of relief that we get to kind of wait and see these cards leave. Next card up on the list is actually going to be Runeforge Champion. Now, I'm not really ranking Runeforge Champion much higher than it really is, just because it is kind of one of those things since the release of Kamigawa and the rise of Naya runes for the most part. You know, this card is not a card that I've seen a lot of play ever since its release, just because it is a little bit of a newer card, I would say, overall compared to some of the other cards, as it really didn't see a lot of prominent play in competitive standard until about the release of Kamigawa. But yet again, for its short time being at the top of the meta for the most part in the Naya Runes deck, it is a card that, is kind of happy to see it and all the runes kind of go away with it. Just because it and going with the naturalist, kind of teaming those guys up and essentially being able to play your runes for free, definitely made the runes deck as popular as it was when it released. It's kind of went through the same effect that, Boros aggro went through, where the deck was very powerful when it first released. It kind of hit that peak, and then as, the meta settled, it kind of fell back down into place where it probably should have fit. But yet again, it's just one of those cards that when you see it, or you see some of the pieces from the Naya Runes deck, it's kind of like, I have to play runes again kind of thing. And it's definitely a card that, as much as I didn't see a ton of play ever since it released, it's definitely going to be one of those cards going to be happy that it leaves play, and kind of seeing that, see enchantments play a little bit more fair magic, I would say, overall, even though they switched to like something like Selesnya, enchantments, I would say, is probably where that shifts to, but it probably won't be as powerful, and you're not going to get some crazy big creatures as quickly as you would if you were playing the Naya Runes deck. So definitely a card that I can't wait to rotate. The next card up on the list is actually another interesting card that I can't wait to rotate, and that card's going to be Blizzard Brawl. Yet again, going alongside with Blizzard Brawl and other snow, spells and the snow lands that kind of go along with it. Blizzard Brawl has been one of those like very strong cards for being only a 1-mana uncommon that has a lot of power. The fact that if you have 3 or more snow lands out on the battlefield, it gives target creature +1/+0 and indestructible, which made playing against mono green Stompy not as fun, because you always expected not just the Snakeskin Veil, but you always expected this card to kind of take their big creature, fight one of your creatures, and then get in through some big damage. And for it being an uncommon, yet again, it's a very powerful card for the the rarity. And it's good that there's spells of this rarity, but kind of seeing it ever since it released being as prominent in play in a mono green deck is definitely going to be one of those sighs of relief that maybe they'll get another fight spell, but it probably won't be the same idea as a Blizzard Ball, which definitely will be a sigh of relief. And I do think it's like that if you're gonna fight a creature, I would say you don't give it like indestructible. You can pump the creature maybe, but indestructible is definitely a hard thing to kind of get around. And I kind of can't wait for this card, and as well as all the other snow spells and permanents to kind of leave standard. So definitely can't wait for this card to leave overall. So the next card up on this list, and you can kind of start seeing a theme as I kind of get lower and lower on the list, but the next card up on this list is going to actually be Elite Spellbinder. It is a very good card, and the reason why I kind of put this here on the list is just because there's a lot of things that Mono White does already have, and this is kind of one of those things that Mono White has on top of what they already have, because they already have cards that can tax you with Dahlia. They have Redain. I think you have Elite Spellbinder on top of it, which is another card that gets to look at your hand and take a card from your hand and now tax it even more. So if you have that in combination with a Redain or even a Thalia, you take your non-creature spell and now it's even taxed. It's a tax additional 2 on top of the fact that it maybe taxed that additional 1. And with it being a 3/1 flyer is definitely a very strong card. But after seeing it, see a ton of play ever since its release, especially as prominent as Mono White has been in the meta as a whole, Elite Spellbinder is kind of one of those cards that I kind of can't wait to see leave play, just because I hope that Mono White gets a little bit more into a fair playing field, I would say, overall, and just having so many answers for many things. Not just this card, but a lot of other cards that are currently in Mono White that will be leaving the format definitely are cards I can't wait to see overall leave. Keeping on that whole cards I can't wait to see leave Mono White, and next card up is going to be Skyclave Apparition. Yet again, another card that I think there's a little bit of redundancy in Mono White, that there's a lot of cards that have a lot of value that work very well in tandem and just kind of make Mono White be able to do a lot of things without really having to play a lot of non-creature spells in order to do that. And this combined with things like Brutal Cathar definitely are some cards that are very frustrating to play against, just because before Brutal Cathar this was okay. You had a way to get through it by destroying it, get a token version of your creature based on its converted mana cost back onto your side of the battlefield, which creates a blocker, which is definitely pretty good. But this, and also then Brutal Cathar, was definitely too much, I would say, of them having pretty good answers at the 3-drop slot. Then on top of it, just like the last card, having things like Elite Spellbinder, definitely made Mono White have that very strong curve to make it very hard to play against. And Skyclave Apparition being able to hit not just creatures but also hit non-creature things up to 4 mana definitely makes it very frustrating, because a lot of the cards that could maybe fight against this, that doesn't make this as powerful, get hit by its other ability. It's definitely one of those things that definitely are hard to kind of get around, but if you can kind of time it, maybe have a removal open and be able to maybe shock it or do something to it before it actually removes your thing, was kind of really the only answer you could look for. Outside of that, the card gets exiled, and then you just end up with a token if you are able to remove it. But yet again, another card in mono white that I kind of can't wait to leave the format, just because it is very powerful alongside of what else is in mono white. So definitely another card I can't wait to see leave play. Now, the next card up on the list is going to be Blood on the Snow. This is yet again another snow spell that I, in itself is a pretty good removal spell. 6 mana, destroy either target creatures or target planeswalker. The fact that, based on how much snow you play, you then get to return a planeswalker or a creature with snow mana value or less from your graveyard back onto the battlefield, in itself is definitely very good. But I do think the reason why this is kind of a card I can't wait to see play is the fact that Mono Black has this. Then on top of it, they have things like Meathook Massacre. So it's definitely one of those things that kind of like in together. Mono Black has a lot of good removal, even compared to things like Mono White, as much as Mono White has things like, Doomscar and things like that. I do think this in tandem with Meathook Massacre makes Mono Black, especially Mono Black like control, very strong. And the fact that you get so much value out of it. So as you may have went through and fought through all the creatures, maybe fought through Mono Black's Planeswalker, for only them to wipe your whole board out and then get back that Planeswalker you may have been spending a few turns on just remove. So definitely a card that just had a lot of value, like I said, in combination with things like Meathook Massacre. Definitely made facing Mono Black overall in general very frustrating to play, and this card was kind of a card that kind of put that icing on the cake, I would say. Now the next card up on the list, and I do think this is kind of where I got to that point where there's a lot of tough decisions that I made within my top 3/top 4. And that card's going to be Asika's Chariot. It's a very strong card. It's definitely a card that saw yet again a whole bunch of play ever since it's been released. It's a 4-mana 4/4 vehicle that when it comes into the battlefield, you get 2 cat tokens, and then when you attack with it, you get to copy target token. It's definitely a card that has been very dominant in ever since it saw play. I mean, it saw enough dominance in normal standard that when they eventually nerfed it in Alchemy, it's still a pretty decent card. Maybe not as good, but yet again, it's still essentially the same shell, though you get 1 less cat token and you only have to crew for 2. So definitely a weird trade-off, but definitely a card that that they had to kind of adjust the rules on it. And it's definitely one of those cards that is very frustrating on, just because typically a person who may play this card may also play a bunch of other creatures that they can use those creatures to tap it when they come in the battlefield to only then attack it with it and then all the cat tokens that it creates. Then on top of that, the amount of things that creates tokens and this combines with, it has other targets other than just the cat tokens that it creates. It can get a tree folk creature from, the Planeswalker. It can, copy Obnixilis. If you get the token of Obnixilis and create treasure it can copy treasure tokens. Essentially, it just has a lot of upside, and it's definitely one of those cards that, I kind of can't wait to see play, just because of its way to kind of like flood the board with a bunch of things on turn 4. Not only are you getting 2 cat tokens, you're getting a 4/4 that copies and makes more things on the creature on the board, and then you have to you have to prevent your opponent from having creatures on the battlefield. Then on top of it, have to figure out a way to then get rid of the Chariot, and then there are not many decks play main deck artifact removal, so you're hoping for your opponent to activate it to then you maybe use a spot removal spell on it. But overall, it has been a very pesky card. It's a card that saw a lot of play in various decks that played green in some sort of way. So definitely a card I can't wait to rotate, just because you kind of see it one too many times in various decks. It's kind of it's redundant. You kind of know what to expect when you get a Chariot. But yet again, another card I can't wait to see leave play. Now, the next card up on my list, and this is kind of a card that I personally I'm not a big fan of, though it is a really good card, and that card's going to be Wolf Spider Queen. It's a 5-mana Planeswalker for loyalty. And the reason why I'm not a big... I really hated playing against this card. It was kind of one of those pesky cards in combination with what is in Mono Black that was very good in the sense that your Mono Black player is cool with wiping out their own creatures in the process of trying to get rid of your creatures, and then being able to then put that loyalty back on Lowell to only just replay those creatures. And then on top of that, the creatures have Menace and Reach. Definitely made the spiders it created very, very good. On top of that, you had a 0-mana ability that allowed you to draw a card at the cost of 1 life, which is definitely very good. While its -8 was never really saw play, the first 2 abilities really make this card super powerful, and the fact that this is a card that typically got targeted by like a Blood on the Snow if it got destroyed, and then on top of that would then wipe out the board in the process, is definitely something to the extent of why Lolth the Spider Queen was kind of one of those cards that I'm more of a fan of leaving standard overall. I did play with it. It is a good card. It is a very it takes over the game kind of card, because not only is it 5 mana, essentially most of the time create 2 spiders that can block very good against a lot of things. It yet again is a very strong card in the fact that every time something dies on your battlefield, its loyalty goes up that way instead of actually having to plus it and slowly go over time. So if you play this in tandem with a board wipe, and you wipe out like 3 creatures on your side of the battlefield, it's going to go up 3 loyalty right off the bat, and then you can just -3, get some spiders back, have blockers or attackers, and essentially kind of shifted the game into your favor when you played this card, or your opponent. So definitely a card that saw a lot of play. It's a good planeswalker, but yet again is a very frustrating planeswalker to play against, and that's kind of why it's in my top 3. Next card up on the list, and I bet you 10 to 1 you're probably sitting here. It's like it's eventually coming. That card's going to be Bloomberg Aspirin. It's a card that's been very dominant in white decks or decks that played any sort of white. It's a 2-mana creature that puts a +1/+1 counter on itself or another creature you control at the beginning of your combat. So the turn you play it, you essentially get a +1/+1 counter. It is something that takes like decks like Boros Aggro, Mono White, any deck that plays white in this. Makes those creatures bigger pretty quickly, and it kind of turns off a lot of the early, spot removal spells like a shock or something like that if you aren't quick enough in order to respond to it. Especially also in like a best of 1 situation. Bloomberg Aspirin was kind of like a key card that kind of helped Mono White propel itself up to the top of the meta as a whole. In that sense, because if the Mono White player is on the play, they're pretty much possibly playing turn 1 creature, turn 2 Bloomberg Aspirin. On turn 2 they're pumping up that creature or itself, and then all of a sudden you have these threats on the battlefield pretty quickly. And the fact that this is a continuous ability that happens every time your opponent goes on their turn is definitely a reason why this card is very frustrating to play against. And it's one of those things, as much as you can hit it early and kind of remove it, if your opponent's spreading those +1/+1 counters onto other creatures, the damage has already been kind of done, because you need that additional removal, not only to remove this card, but also the creature that may be pumped up in the process. So definitely a card is very frustrating. Also, the fact that it's very accessible for only being 2 mana, I think is why it's also very good. The fact that it also got nerfed in Alchemy, that instead of being at the beginning of combat, it's now at the end of turn, so it kind of gives you that other opportunity that it's not as powerful in Alchemy, but it's still, even that, decks in Alchemy still play this card if they play Mono White, just because it is that good. So definitely a card that saw a lot of play. Ever since it was released in Zendikar Horizon, this was like a key staple in the Mono White deck. So it's definitely one of those things that when it rotates out, sure, the Mono White decks are going to miss it, but a lot of players who play against those decks, are not going to miss it, because I do think, the cards that will maybe slot into that spot will not be as powerful, or make at least your creatures on your side of the your opponent's side of the battlefield more powerful than what you can deal with maybe with your spot removal. So definitely a card that I can't wait to rotate. Very frustrating. And just like this card, the next card, the last card on the list is probably yet again another card, probably on a lot of lists that I think are very frustrating. And that card is going to be Goldsman Dragon. This card has been, awesome in the sense that it's a very good 5-drop. It does a lot of things. But the one thing I personally don't like about certain cards is when they have an ability that when this creature gets targeted by a spell, you essentially, this one in particular, you generate mana, and that mana essentially is a treasure token that can produce 2 mana. So in itself, combined with like maybe blue or something like that, you can give this card decent kind of evasiveness, because you target with like maybe like a Vanish Inverse or something like that. Your opponent gets 2 mana once they target it, and then they can use that 2 mana now to counter your Vanish Inverse, and now you need another answer. Then on top of that, they get another mana, another treasure token. Also on top of it, which made this card very, very good. And it's kind of like one of those things that was very, very popular for a few months when it first released, and it kind of fell off a little bit because people kind of understood how to deal with it. But as we kind of got into the current standard and kind of saw it kind of ignite and kind of go back up to the top, it's definitely one of those cards that if you let it create too many treasures, you give your opponent way too much mana, and they have a lot of mana to do a lot of things with. And the fact that it turns all treasures into 2 mana, things is definitely also, a reason why this card to me was very problematic. I think there's that Jeskai deck that essentially plays essentially a storm card that every time you cast a spell, you get copies of this card, and if you target the Goldsman Dragon, you make treasure tokens, which creates a bunch of mana. Then you end up drawing a bunch of cards by playing a bunch of spells. So it's definitely a card that in the more recent standards, we've seen ways for your opponents to kind of figure out how to break this card, in the sense that it definitely doesn't create fun game states. I would say, if there wasn't as many things that you could target this with to kind of generate treasure tokens on top of it, I think that would definitely be a little bit more of a fair card. But the fact that whenever it gets targeted, you create a treasure token. If it attacks, you create a treasure token. If you already have treasure tokens on it, all those treasure tokens that you have all create 2 mana. And the fact that it's flying and haste, that you can do it pretty much immediately, and it's not legendary, overall made this card, very problematic, ever since its release. It's definitely, it's going to be one of those things that a lot of decks that may play this card are going to miss, just because it's not a very easily replaceable card unless we get some sort of other iteration that's kind of similar in the 5-drop slot. But I in my mind, they probably wouldn't release an identical copy and just name it something else. So definitely a card that, I can't wait to rotate. It's definitely a frustrating card. Most of these cards, like I said on the list, are very frustrating. Rather in variants, and I do think, maybe the way I ranked them, it doesn't really, it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, you could probably flip this list around in various situations. You could add or subtract cards from the list, and I do think, a lot of the cards that we may all have are similar are some of these cards, while there may be a couple other ones maybe at the tail end of the list that you could probably add in, and I added in differently. So it's definitely one of those things. If you guys want to let me know what you think down in the comments below of what cards you found frustrating in the current standard or over the past year or so. Let me know what cards that that will be leaving that you can't wait to leave. Definitely, it's going to be interesting to see what you guys think. If you like the video, hit that like button. It definitely helps out a lot. If you're new here, you want to know post new videos on the channel like this one, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.